a mess.
City took me, when I was still chief. PD, the city took me. Yeah, bring it up, and I said, far enough.
Got a 40-foot man lift and 30 is about high enough.
You have a tower, you don't have a tower truck, do you? Oh, do you? Oh,
Ours is a baby.
I was just telling him that the city took me up once when I was chief, police chief. So we're going up. And we're going and going. I said, that's enough, guys. We were, in my opinion, we were quite a ways up. So we got a long way to go. I said, no, we don't.
Yeah, they're supposed up like 95 feet.
I said, I wouldn't be close to that.
So Ryan, Roger, and Glenn, why don't you come right up here and move into these seats, or whether we have people absent from the Board of Commissioners, and everyone, please be sure to use your microphones. We are on the air today. We are live streaming, so
If it saves one.
if you don't hit your mic, we'll remind you. So
How many meetings I've heard that.
Yeah, I tell you.
ready to go. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Airport Zoning Board and Airport Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Call the meeting to order, and I would ask Mrs. Upke to please call the roll.
Okay, the Airport Zoning Board, Commissioner Ungst,
Here.
Commissioner Blanco, Commissioner Collins,
Here,
Commissioner Daly, Commissioner Krasny, Commissioner Martis,
Here.
Commissioner Stimson, Commissioner Tillotson,
Here.
Commissioner Van Doren.
Here.
5 present and 4 absent. And then the Airport Zoning Board of Appeals, Mr. Dave LaMontagne, I apologize. Okay, Roger Johnson,
Here.
Glenn Preston,
Here.
Ryan Rank,
Here.
Nancy Jenkins Arno, Eric Rogers. Yes, alternate. And we have 3 present and 3 absent. Roger Johnson, Glenn Preston, Ryan Rank. Okay, that's true. So 3 present and 2 absent with the alternate not being
We have a
present.
quorum for both boards. Perfect. And to start out, if you could scroll that up a little, please. To start out, we're going to change the order here just briefly of the agenda, and we're going to start out with the administrator talking about the ordinance and some exhibits, and then we'll turn it over to Mrs. Ward from Mead and Hunt.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. The intent today is to be more of a work session so that you can all understand what your roles and responsibilities are. But before we get into that, I wanted to go over a few documents which will you will be utilizing in your positions as the Zoning Board of Appeals and on the Zoning Board. So the first document I have in your packet is the airport zoning ordinance. This is an ordinance that was originally adopted in 1979. It was amended in 2005 and has not been amended since. So as we are looking at making sure all of our boards and commissions and authorities are fully staffed, we took a look at the zoning board and realized, it might be a good time also to look at our zoning ordinance and have that updated. So we did forward that on to our corporation counsel, and what you have in your packet is a redlined version of that. What that means is anything that you see red or underlined has been added or redacted from the original version. There's no action for you to take today on this ordinance, but I wanted to get that to you so that as the board, as the zoning board, you have that opportunity to review that. Because at some point, in the probably not too distant future, we will want to adopt or amend the actual ordinance, and there's a process to do that, which includes posting and having a public meeting so that we can adopt that. So I would encourage you to take a look at this. If you have any questions on the ordinance itself, please feel free to give me a call so that or come in and see me, and we can review them. Attached to the ordinance, and unless you want me to, I didn't plan on going through all of the different pages of the ordinance. I thought you could do that on your own, and we can have a separate meeting to go over the ordinance in more detail. I don't want to use up all of the time because I want Ms. Ward to be able to do what she came to do today. However, attached to the ordinance, you will find there's a number of maps that will be used as guides in determining when something may be falling into the purview of the zoning administrator in designating approvals or variances as he gets those. It also helps as a guide to determine who actually is in our 10-mile radius, which is what we are ultimately responsible for. Those maps are in your packet. I know our airport manager is in the process of working with MDOT to see if we can get some updated CAD versions so that we can update them ourselves. You can see on the first one, it looks kind of like this, that it has the signatures of Larry Gould and Hazel Jacobs and a few people who have preceded us on this board. And we thought it might be helpful to get it updated and have current signatures as long as we are updating the ordinance. Also, on some of these, there's a particular point of reference that we want to use on airport grounds when we are looking at whether a potential application for a structure is within that 10-mile perimeter. And so I would like to make sure that that is detailed out a little bit better on the maps so that we can all see where that point of reference begins. So that kind of covers the first few documents without going into a whole lot of detail. So items B, C, and D. For the Zoning Board of Appeals, for the three of you that are here for that committee, we have created a draft of what we're calling the Lenawee County Airport Zoning Board of Appeals Organization and Procedures Manual. Now, it's kind of a mouthful, but it's basically, here's the rules and regulations in which you're going to operate under. To the best of my knowledge, we could not find these as they may have previously existed. So these are new. We did compliment one of our neighboring counties who did have this already in place. And so we are borrowing it and updating it to for Lenawee County. So as a zoning board of appeals member, if you could take a look at the rules and regulations that are included here, you're going to see a few comments along the edges, not very many, but a few comments, because these are areas that we are still looking at and may want to make some revisions to. Should you, as you review these, have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to contact the administrator's office and I can try to help you with those, or we can get a list of them so that if we have another meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals to adopt these, we can make sure that everyone's comments have been included. Now, at the end of the these rules and regulations, if you will, we have an attachment A, which shows all of the participants that are on the Zoning Board of Appeals, shows your contact information. Please verify that to make sure we have everything correct when you get to that. And it does show also that you are all serving on a 3-year term, which expires December of 2027. Attachment B, if you take a look at that, there is something called an application for appeal. Take a look at that. Stephanie's going to get into this. I don't want to steal her thunder, but basically, if someone has made application to the zoning administrator, who is your airport manager, and he has denied the request and the requester would like to appeal, they would appeal to you. And this is the form that they would potentially use. There's also a fee associated with that, which is listed just a couple of pages in, and that fee is $150 per request, which is what we are proposing. It's up to you. We can change that if you would wish. And then there's the notice that would need to go out, letting everybody know that there was going to be a request heard that would be as a variance for the Zoning Board of Appeals. So those are all of the documents that are in your folder. So you've got a lot of homework. If you haven't looked at them already, you'll need to do that because we will be having meetings of both of these groups, not necessarily in tandem. We may have them individually so that we can work through any questions, comments, or concerns that you have on your documents before we actually move those to formal adoption. So if you have any questions on the documents themselves, I will try to answer those. Okay, I think that takes care of my portion, Chair.
Okay. Thank you for that. Ms. Ward.
Good afternoon. Did anybody warn you guys there was going to be a test later? No? Okay. There's going to be a test later. As Kim has mentioned, my name is Stephanie Ward. So I'm with Mead and Hunt. I have had the pleasure of working with Lenawee County for over 30 years now, which is disturbing because all those names that are on that map, I actually worked with back in the day. So apparently I started when I was 12. Today the goal is really to help educate you so that you understand what your role is with the new, or I shouldn't say new, the changes that are being proposed with the ordinance. So Lenawee County is one of the few, I think there's less than a dozen or thereabouts, counties that have an airport that have a zoning ordinance of this type. Many of them did not partake in the zoning act that allows a county to, or city, to develop a zoning ordinance. So it has had, as you can see, just only one update since the 1970s when it was originally implemented. So the timing is really good for that implementation and revisiting it. And so the reason for that is that for those of you that have been here for over the past year, you'll know that we're undertaking an airport project to look at obstructions in the approach. One of the things that we could have done was we could have potentially used the airport zoning ordinance as one of our tools for dealing with those obstructions, but it wasn't in a good spot. It hadn't been updated recently. The graphics that are associated with it were not in a usable format. So that kind of helped jumpstart what's the timing of this. So the roles for all of you as the board, because the county board serves as the zoning board, after you adopt whatever changes we propose to make with the ordinance, your job is going to be done for the most part. Your job is to act as that oversight when it's time for election of new or appointment of new zoning board of appeals members, that will be your role. But as a general rule, you're going to be done as soon as we get an adopted ordinance out and running. For the Zoning Board of Appeals, you guys are going to have a little heavier lift, and that, as Kim has already alluded to, if someone within that 10-mile radius that we have of the zoning ordinance submits an application to the zoning administrator, which right now it's planned to be the airport manager, and if the airport manager finds that that is not to be approved based upon what's in the ordinance, then they are denied and they have the right to appeal. And so it will come back to you as the Zoning Board of Appeals to hear that. What our goal is, and we've given Kim a few examples of some materials, and most of those have been identified in the zoning permit request that you would use as a benchmark for what would you evaluate that request for appeal. One of the key parts that you probably hear me say it at least twice, if not 3 times before we finish today, and it probably won't be the last time you hear me say it, is that one of the things that you will see with zoning is that an applicant will come in if they're well-versed in the topic of airspace, and they are going to hold up a approval letter, which is not an approval, from the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. They will come in and tell you, well, we've gone through the federal process and they've approved our proposal. Well, the FAA does not approve a development. They have the right to find that it's an obstruction, it's not an obstruction, or it's an obstruction that can be mitigated. And that's an important key because in a lot of situations, zoning boards feel intimidated, if you will, that, well, that letter, FAA's already blessed it, so it must be okay, we need to approve it. And that's not the case. So they're going to provide that as an advisory body. FAA doesn't have any regulatory ability to say yes or no on that. They purely can comment on what's the impact to airspace. The state of Michigan has a similar that mirrors what the FAA is looking at, and that's under the Michigan Tall Structures Act. They are going to evaluate it basically under the same criteria, with the caveat that as a part of their review, they have to ask you as the airport sponsor and having an airport zoning ordinance, what your opinion is. And so the state of Michigan cannot issue their tall structures permit until they've come to you and gotten from Lenawee County what your position is on the project. So just because FAA says they don't have a problem with it does not mean that the state of Michigan is going to approve it, nor does it mean that you have to approve it. So you're going to evaluate it based upon the criteria that you have in your document and make that decision. So no pressure to the Zoning Board of Appeals, but you got a heavy burden to lift here. So that's kind of the important part that I hope you take away, that I did 9 years as the Clinton County Planning Commission, sat on this side of the table, if you will, and had lots of developers, because that was heavy in the cell phone age, where we had lots of people come in and wave that letter and tell me, well, I have FAA approval. And it was kind of fun for me to sit on that side and say, I don't think so. It's not quite that easy. So that's an important piece to take away for you as the Zoning Board of Appeals. The process itself is pretty self-explanatory. In your zoning ordinance, I won't quote it chapter and verse, but there are specific height limitations that are identified for the different radiuses. So if you look at the map that was there, I don't know, was it Jessica or Jennifer? Sorry. Could you go to the map? Yeah, thank you. So if you can turn sideways, there's actually a set of surfaces that you can see that are the green, that are in very close. Those are the approach areas to both of the runways that we have at the airport. That's a very dense area. That's where the aircraft are using for landing and taking off. We want to protect that, and that's the most critical area that's being looked at. Those elevations are kind of gospel, if you will. The next radius that you see out that's kind of doesn't have any surfaces but is the clear area, that is our designation out to 3 miles. So that's a 3-mile radius around the airport. That has a flat surface. That is anything above 150 feet is what we're looking at. It's a, if you think of it, kind of a football stadium. So the playing field is the runways. Those areas that you see that dense pattern, that's kind of in the stadium. We breach to the big concourse, and that's the flat area that's 150 feet. And then you'll see the radius from 3 miles out to the 6.32. That's where we climb up at a different gradient that's giving us more of that bowl. And then we get out from there out to the 10-mile radius. So it's a fairly significant area that we're looking at. And there's a reason for that, in that when aircraft are operating in and out of the airport, they can come in from any direction. They can take off and depart from the runway and immediately turn left or right in any direction, heading north, south, east, west. So we're really looking to preserve that airspace around the airport, so aircraft that are coming and going are going to be operating safely. So the reason for that, and the reason I bring your attention to it, is that there are specific limitations then in the ordinance so that poor Thomas or whoever you have as your airport manager doesn't get overrun. This isn't that we're looking at every garage that's going to be built. This isn't looking at every porch that's going to get amended. In the area within 6 miles, we're looking at anything over 25 feet. Much of your existing zoning ordinance within that area is already limiting in development to those heights. So we're really looking more at industrial developments that might have smokestacks, multi-level buildings, those types of things. Those are what we're going to look at. And again, it doesn't mean it's going to be denied. It just means we want to have the opportunity to look at it. And that actually mirrors what FAA asks of you. The challenge that we have in a lot of instances is that the local property owners have no idea that they're actually supposed to be submitting a request for airspace review to the FAA and to MDOT if they're in that 10-mile radius. That's unfortunately I'll say a well-kept secret, but that would imply people actually even knew about it to keep it secret. It just is. So part of this exercise, the administrator and I have discussed that it's probably timely that should the airport or should the county board approve the revisions to the ordinance, that'd be a great time for a notification to be sent to every property owner that's in that radius, that it's been adopted, that you're within that ordinance or in that area, and what it means to you. We're happy to help with that messaging when the time comes, if you'd like. When you're out in that 10-mile radius, we're really only talking about very tall structures. We're talking about wind turbines, cell towers, things of that nature that are going to be significant. And then obviously, the closer we get to the runway, that elevation comes down, and so we're more concerned about taller, but not as tall of obstructions. And so when we get out to the 6.5 to 10-mile radius, then we're looking at only things above 100 feet. So again, a lot of latitude. So again, maybe a grain elevator, those types of things that are going to be something that would come to the fruition. So, we don't anticipate this to be overly cumbersome to your general population of the county, but is something that is important to protect your investment. If you remember when I was here and talked about the easements that we're acquiring, one of the reasons this is really important is you do have federal grant assurances that the county signs every time you take federal money that does say that you will protect against obstructions to your approaches and from incompatible land uses. So by adopting, or I should say amending this to address the current situation, will keep you in compliance with those grant assurances. So fairly critical exercise as well, just to keep that updated. So that's kind of what I have for you, unless you have questions for me. I know it's a lot to take in. I commend Kim and her team, as well as legal counsel, for the suggested edits that they've made to the ordinance. I believe that's really going to help clarify a lot of elements that normally aren't there. Usually these ordinances are kept pretty technical. I think the language that's been added does add a lot of clarity that we don't usually get to have. So I think that will help in its administration.
So we'll open this up for questions. As the administrator said, that we know that's a lot of information today that you're getting. And so we're hopeful everyone will take this information back and review it. And then we're going to schedule a public hearing for the ordinance and a vote on the ordinance, which will be done by the County Board of Commissioners. And then I'm sure the Zoning Board of Appeals will have another meeting after that. So, but in the meantime, if you've got questions today for Ms. Ward or the administrator, please, let's have them today. Commissioner Collins.
You said earlier that in the state application that we're asking for approval, that the state has to come local and ask our opinion.
Correct. Part of their review. So they do have, they use the same criteria that the FAA does in terms of their evaluation. The difference is the state of Michigan actually has the right to say yes or no.
Without approval. I mean, if they ask our opinion, it differs from theirs. Does that make any kind of?
Typically, they do not, knock on wood, they do not override that. So they would typically come to you as the local jurisdiction. If you have said you concur with the finding, then they will concur. If you say we have an issue with it because of our findings, our ordinance, then they typically will deny as well. And so they do have the police power to say yes or no, where FAA is strictly providing commentary.
Other questions? Commissioner Martis.
Stephanie, we had a brief chat before the meeting. In my district, we have two other airports. One is a public use airport, Blissfield, Betts Field, and another airport. And you had mentioned that it may be possible, and something I never thought of until you and I discussed this, that our ordinance could in fact offer some protections to those airports too, if we chose to. Could you give me a little more background on that?
Sure. So the county has the ability to potentially add in one or both of those, it would be at your discretion, into your zoning ordinance if you wanted to. You are protecting the airspace. I know that Blissfield right now, because it is a public use airport, has what's called an airport approach plan. That has both height limitations as well as those land use limitations, just like you have in the ordinance. So if you were interested in bringing that into the fold, that could be brought in. We could assist you with creating an overlay, if you will, that took both of those surfaces into account. The surface for Blissfield, as an example, would not be as large because it would not have the if we utilize the approach plan, it doesn't go out to 10 miles. So it would look different, but it would come in that overlay, and you would have some overlap potentially within their boundaries.
Commissioner Martis?
Do we, and you may have this, there must be a list then of other airports in the county that, I mean, of all the other public use airports, that's obviously a known thing. Do we have an idea how many other airports? I mean, I'm familiar with, Clinton, Tecumseh, et cetera.
I'm sure there is one. I mean, I know that within the state of Michigan, they are classified by a number that assigns them to the county of residents. I don't have that at my disposal right now, but we certainly could get it if that was something that you were interested in taking a look at. What did they look like? The reason I mentioned Blissfield is because it is a public use that affords it the airport approach plan. The other airfield, because it's not currently public use, would not be subject to that. That would be something that if the county wanted to include that, that would be something that you'd have to look at separately, or, could include in here, but I know that right now the inclusion of the airport approach plan for Blissfield already does exist.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Rank?
Just wanted to clarify, so you did say within 6 miles of the airport, so 0 to 6 miles with a 25-foot rule,
Correct,
and then from 6 to 10 was a 100-footer over.
correct.
Commissioner Martis?
But on that point, that's a notification rule
Correct.
that there's a different set of regulations that regulate the height. It's just if
Correct.
you're above that height, you need to.
Right, so like if you look at this graphic as an example, so that area, you can see the area that are kind of green in the center. Those are what we call the FAR Part 77 surfaces. So that's the most restrictive area. The area that's around it, that is that flat plateau, it has an allowable elevation of 150 feet above the airport. But we're asking for applications for anything 25 feet and above so that we can evaluate it and confirm that it's not an issue. Just because we have allowable height, that's one component. The ordinance actually takes into account land use as well. And so that's the reason for that differentiation, that there is a height component that we're looking at, and then there's also compatible land use. If you look at that drawing as an example, if we go to the south west corner, so that would be off the runway 5 approach at the airport. If someone came in there and proposed to do a confined feedlot, as an example, that is something that is considered to be an incompatible land use because of the wildlife attractants that are typically associated with a CAFO. So if that were to come in, there probably isn't anything on that facility that would be too tall, but it would be a land use that would be considered to be incompatible. And so you would deny the permit under the land use potential. So that's kind of the difference where that is. So I didn't touch much on the land use side because usually it's the heights that are the bit greater concern, but there's a land use component as well that would be taken into account. So then we could see the additional lines then going from that 3-mile buffer out to the 6.5, those climb. So while the bench layer is still that 25 feet, or excuse me, I said 100, isn't it? 100 feet from the 6.32 to the 10. So those individual lines, those are climbing up at a gradient that's going to give you a greater allowable height with each piece, but we're still going to look at that 25-foot permitting area.
Commissioner Martis?
And just, sorry, the zoning administrator in me comes out these times, but with respect to your education of the zoning board of appeals and the push for variances, and I'm sure many of you are officials and you know this anyways, but we have to remember that a variance is a permanent right to break the law. And they shouldn't be granted just out of inconvenience to the applicant, but that rather has to be a unique hardship with each individual parcel, which is something that gets glossed over a lot. I like the fact that this language has a lot of clarity added into it about what constitutes a hardship. Just wanting something that doesn't comply with the law is not a hardship. You can't self-inflict a hardship, but I was glad to see that clarity brought into this draft version.
That's a great point. I mean, that's one of the challenges I think that we have consistently is, as soon as you crack that door open with a variance, you've now set a stage. So would definitely encourage you to think through all of that hardship element as you're reviewing it, that it could make a significant difference, because as soon as you set the precedence with one, you've opened the door for more.
In addition to that, as members of these committees, we're representing some 99,000 people. So lots of times you have people making noise in smaller groups, but we're representing the entire county with our airport. Other questions? Well, that's great. There's a lot to take in here. Please take them home, review them. We're going to be moving forward with this. You'll probably hear from us fairly soon because we already have some activity going on in the area, and we want to get these cleared up and in order. So Commissioner Martis.
Do we want to take a stab at picking our next meeting date, or do we need more information from our consultants before we do that?
Good question.
If you would prefer, I mean, we could look at that, but we do not have all of either of the committees present to know what everyone's availability is. We can handle that, I think, administratively by sending out a request to see when we can meet again. Ideally, I would think for the zoning board, it might make sense to meet possibly previous to a Board of Commissioners meeting or before a Personal Ways and Means meeting, as you will all already be here. So we would meet as one board, take a recess, give time for communications and marketing to get us from one meeting to the next, and then start as either Ways and Means or the Board of Commissioners. So.
I think that's a good point. That's what we'll plan on doing, yes.
The one thing I would just say is before we schedule that, I would probably do a quick question because we will ultimately need to advertise the zoning ordinance for a public hearing. So my question, just so that those of you that are here will be thinking about it, is do you want to have a meeting with just the board where we can go through the ordinance and answer any questions that you may have before we schedule it for that public hearing and potential adoption? I did verify, I know a lot of times with an ordinance, we know that it requires 2 readings. However, with the zoning ordinance, it is possible to have you review it, schedule the public hearing, and then adopt it at that following that public hearing without doing a second reading. So I have checked into that.
I think it would be appropriate to have a meeting just to go over the ordinance, correct?
I agree.
Commissioners?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll plan on that.
Okay.
We'll get schedules and
We'll check the April calendar so that we can do this while it's fresh. And Zoning Board of Appeals, sort of the same thing. You're getting all your documents. You don't have everybody here from your committee. So we will probably schedule another meeting of the committee just to go over the documents that you have, answer any questions you might have about the applications, the process itself, that sort of thing. So we'll reach out to you on that also.
Commissioner Martis?
And then the zoning board, are we required to meet at least once a year? Is that,
It's one time a year,
and the ZBA only as needed?
correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Tillotson?
The last couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks.
Your microphone. Oh, all right.
We got or I did anyway. Got something, I think, from Kim. That had to do with a situation where it was one of those situations where they kind of got the horse before the cart and they needed to know something. And it has pertained to the solar that's to the northeast of the solar that's out on Wilmouth Highway now. And they wanted to meet within a certain period of time.
I know what you're talking about now. We have actually received notification from, I think, 2 or 3 different solar companies at this point, looking to potentially see if the county has an ordinance regarding the solar and alternative energy, CREO, I believe is what it's called. And so the response that we have provided in that case, which I think is what you're thinking about, is that the county does not have that ordinance. However, That does not mean that the local municipalities may not have that ordinance. So in those cases, there was nothing for the airport nor the county to do other than to respond to the letter, which we did. But that kind of goes along with what Ms. Ward is saying. There's a lot of activity going on out there with things that may impact the airspace that we're looking at with the airport. And that's another reason why it's very important to make sure that our ordinance is up to date and that these boards, both of these boards, are familiar with what their roles and responsibilities are in the event we do get an application, in the event we do deny an application, and in the event someone decides they want to apply for a variance to appeal a decision.
Mr. Rank.
So I have a question for Ms. Ward. Regarding land use, if the county doesn't have anything for solar regulation, and I'll just give you an example, Madison Township, we've got some interest. They have a ordinance that was done prior to me coming in. But the land use, and in some of them are in extreme close vicinities to the airport. Is there anything in our ordinance or the county's ordinance that would affect that?
There is. If we could possibly go to the maps, and I'll tell you when to stop. Next one. Next one. Should be one that's got the zones. It might be on the backs of that one. Oh, can you scroll down from that one? I think it's hiding. I've got it in the hard copy version. Try that one. Is it behind the title page?
I
Oh,
didn't-
sorry. It's go down to, it's under the exhibit D. There you go. There we go. So to your question about Madison Township, so the land use criteria actually comes from this drawing. So you have your zoning ordinance that was originally adopted in the 70s. That is what provides you for the height limitation. This is the graphic and was why the ordinance was adopted, or it was amended in 2005, was to add the airport approach element in, which is the land use side of the house. So I know it's a little hard to see, and that's one of the things that we're going to work with Kim and Thomas on getting this graphic so it's more usable. Is everywhere that you see, they're kind of those fan shapes and then the long skinny pieces coming out. Those have the land use restrictions associated with it. And the challenge that's going to be with this is the state language that applies to the approach plan. So these land use strategies said that basically any property within those surfaces since the time of adoption, which was for you, I think, early 2000s, like 2001 or 2002, that zoning within those surfaces does not become any more incompatible. So basically froze the zoning. So as an example, if looking at that graphic down to the south west corner, that long skinny piece that you see sticking out from the fan, if somebody were to come in there and want to make that a residential subdivision, because I'm guessing it's probably zoned agricultural right now, that would not be allowed to take place because that would be making it more incompatible than what it was at the time of adoption. So again, that really speaks to, again, that timing of adoption and setting that clock of what do we have moving forward. So to your question about Madison Township, you know, if there's something coming in that would be more incompatible than what's currently allowed there today, that's going to be a problem. Now, the flip side is if, with that being, again, I'm making an assumption that it's zoned agricultural. If the current zoning in an agricultural district allows for, you know, 5 houses on 10-acre lots, that's going to be allowed because that doesn't change the original intent of what it was zoned. But any sort of upzoning is the term we would typically use, making it more dense is what's going to be considered to be a problem. So again, and that focuses just strictly on those surfaces. So we're not talking out to the 10-mile range from the limitations. Now, that doesn't change up that you're allowed to look at what the land use is out to 10 miles. It's just saying, making it no worse is supposed to be in this zone. Does that make sense? There's actually 5 different zones and there's land use strategies that go with it as far as what should or shouldn't be allowed.
Okay, thanks.
You're going to regret asking that question, aren't you?
Commissioner Tillotson.
Yeah. Somewhat something I never thought too much about. Is the glare. You know, and how far out that is, as time will tell, but you know, the solar that's out by me is not very far from that airport. So as time goes on, maybe glare is gonna be something that,
Glare is definitely a topic. I mean, the technology on the solar panels has evolved, that they are not nearly as reflective as they used to be. And so that would be an element that is a part of your review process. We would certainly encourage you to require the applicant to do a glare analysis and provide that to you. You can also, you can ask that via FAA as well. FAA, if they're at all concerned about it, can ask that of an applicant. So that could be something that, again, is a part of the review process, that you would ask them to come back with a glare analysis. They're real things. Our company does them. There's a number of different companies that do them. But as a general rule, we're seeing them being less of an issue. And a lot of it has to do with placement. You know, looking at that graphic as an example, you know, we wouldn't want any solar being placed within that long skinny fan shape, because if a pilot's on approach to the runway, the last thing we want them is getting glare. If it was on the east or west side where they're pointed in a different direction, that we don't have to worry quite as much about that. That's different. So then it depends on, are they the type that are going to follow the sun pattern, that are movable. Some of them are static. All that's going to come into play that you would look at as it relates to that topic. Great question.
Commissioner Martis.
Would you speak, going back to the couple other airports, is there some language that you might have existing already of what a regulation might look like for one of these smaller airports, as far as the regulate?
The short answer is I've got the graphics, because MDOT created those for every airport. The challenge with those, and we're struggling with this, is that they did not give us any sort of I'll call it user's manual, like what you've proposed here. There are some other joint use, for example, if you're familiar at all with the Saginaw Bay City Midland area. All 4 of those airports, so Saginaw Harry Brown, Jack Barstow in Midland, James Clements in Bay City, and MBS International, are all governed by a single cohesive zoning ordinance for all 4 of those airports. So the short answer is there really isn't anything formal that exists that we could pull from, but there's pieces and parts that we could bring together for you.
Thank you.
Administrator Murphy.
Stephanie, for the benefit of this group, we kind of were talking about it when Supervisor Rank was talking about it. If a municipality is fielding a building permit of some sort, how does the airport find out there's something that is going to be built within, let's say, the runway approach, or within even that 10-mile radius? How do we know that that's happening until after it started to happen and now we create a pretty difficult situation?
It's a great question, and that's usually unfortunately where we find ourselves. So my suggestion would be, much like convening this group or groups, is that as soon as we get the ordinance where we want it, is that we would convene all of the municipalities that fall within that 10-mile boundary, and we have an educational session to explain to them their roles and responsibilities. Unfortunately, that's an element that is very lacking as it relates to either full-blown zoning ordinances like what you have, or these airport approach plans. I would bet dollars to donuts right now, whatever municipality Blissfield is sitting within and has these surfaces, they have no idea that they're not supposed to be changing zoning, that they're supposed to be looking at things. It's unfortunately very common across the state. So My suggestion would be a training session and then periodic review of that to keep that up to date so that, as you have transition of staff, that they know and understand that. The other element with it, and we've talked about, technology is our friend now, right? So we should lean into it, that these are things that we can create in graphics. Hopefully the different municipalities are using some sort of GIS where they could go in and look at it and be able to tell, do I or don't I need to submit for it? So we have worked with some other municipalities, developing a tool for them where it makes it more seamless for them to know, do I or don't I, and how do I submit? So those could be potentially things that we could look at if that's a avenue that the county was interested in.
Great point, because I think you're absolutely right. I'm sure a lot of people have no understanding of what's going on with the airport. Commissioner Martis.
Well, and just thinking it from the township perspective, I mean, for us, then it would be a simple matter of saying, well, here's your zoning application checklist anyways. It's just one more box that they need to check off. Some like Bruce Nichols Townships, he's got pages of checklists and documents and stuff to go through. Others, you just call a guy up and he presumes it's valid. So, yeah, probably not that big of a burden once they're made aware.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever seen Jackson's as an example, Jackson County Airport has a zoning ordinance, takes into account, I think, 6 different townships, plus the city of Jackson. And so back when we did that ordinance, each municipality has their own graphic that shows them that they can put their finger on the map of do I or don't I, if it's X amount of height, then that's available to them. So, we could do that in old school paper if that's, where they're at, or like I said, in an electronic version to help with that. But, because they're the first line of defense to the administrator's point. Usually it's once the bulldozer is short up before we realize, hey, there's a problem. And then it's usually too late.
I have a quick question. Mr. Preston.
So so I work for the city of Adrian. So let's say that we get a variance request for some type of business that wants to put up 100-foot tower or whatever. It sounds like we should, in any situation like that, because that would be within that 10-mile radius, that before the city approves anything, that it needs to consult with this, correct?
Correct.
And I'm assuming that this would take precedent over that because this is talking about air traffic.
Correct.
Okay.
So this is, think of this as an overlay district, that this, whatever their normal ability to do is one element, and then you have the airport criteria on top of it.
And that would trump whatever, so that could prohibit the city from doing that variance because it's not in compliance with this.
Correct.
That is great information to know.
Yep.
I don't think anybody knew that,
Right.
especially me.
I mean, you can see with that graphic, because of the approach that we have into the runway, you can see that long tail that's going up past 223.
Correct.
So, that's getting up into the city, obviously. If something were to be proposed in that area, that would be definitely a trigger for us. So anything above 25 feet, anything in the airport subdivision and moving up past 223, first thing is, if it's over 25 feet, it should be coming to the airport first to take a look at and say, it's not anything that we're concerned about from a height perspective or a land use, and then give that back to the city as a review.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jim, I move that you tell Dr. Docking his arch has to go.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Rank? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Good conversation. Please review the documents. In the meantime, we'll be seeing a lot of each other here in the near future. Is everyone aware of our airport manager? Could you please introduce yourself, Thomas? Stand up and.
I'm Thomas Kinziora. I'm the airport manager. If you ever have any questions, you can feel free to call us. Love to answer anything. I like to talk, so yeah, I'm pretty informative. So whatever you need, give me a holler.
Nice to meet you.
He's also now the zoning administrator.
Right.
Yes. I'm new to that role as well, so.
Very good. Thank you, Thomas.
Yep.
Is there any public comment? Member comments? Commissioner Ungst.
I just want to thank you for having this meeting. I definitely learned a lot today and it's very informative. I can see we have quite a bit of work to do, but definitely informative.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion by Commissioner Collins, supported by Commissioner Martis to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Motion opposed. We are adjourned.